Welcome back. Welcome back. No? Okay. One time. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Hey. Thank you for coming back to the Social Change Theater Festival, our inaugural 2025 festival. Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your willingness to be here. Our repeat returners, thank you. That's 3 days of festival. That is a lot, and you have done it. Shout out to you. And for those of you that are joining us today for the first time, thank you for coming. I hope you have a blast for the rest of today. If you don't know who I am, my name is Kevin Ausu. I'm one of the associate directors with Still Point Theater Collective, and I'm one of the producers of the festival. Just a few quick thank yous and shout out. Just the team that has put this festival together. We have a few folks in here. We have Carmen, we have Daniel, we have Nate, we have Emma that's hiding, going towards the booth. We have Isabel sitting back there as well. So big thank you to all of them for all that. Oh, and Jade's right there too. There's Jade. And Marcel's outside. You either got an email from Marcel, you saw him as you were coming in. So thank you to them for all of that. And then we have to thank our sponsors and donors, because up until yesterday morning, we were not sure that we were going to be able to come out of this festival in the black. So we want to say thank you to the Philanthropic Ventures Foundation, to the McMullen and Kim Charitable Trust, and as well as to James Aveliotis, William Eliza Haynes, Carson Becker, the Seabury Foundation, the Paulin Engel Foundation, and Sarah Ailey. So thank you to those people. Now, the moment you have all been waiting for. Me struggling with my notes. Oh gosh. All right, well, one thing I can do is go off script.
I was going to give you that 5 minutes later.
Yeah, no, don't do that to me now. First off, I'd like to introduce everyone that is on this panel today. So first off, we'll start on my left-hand side and work our way down. Kurt, if you could please introduce yourself, your name, your pronouns. Where are you from? That isn't a place. And you have to say it in as few words as possible.
Okay, I am Kurt Tofflin. I'm the founder of Shakespeare Behind Bars, he, him, and I come from curiosity, imagination, creativity.
Woo. Clinical. Next up, Lynn Pace Green.
Hi, I'm Lynn Pace Green. I use she, her pronouns. And I come from hardworking, blue-collar people and cornfields and rivers.
Lizzie May.
I'm Lizzie May. I use she, they pronouns, and I come from my Nana's storytelling.
Oswald Eckford.
My name is Oswald Eckford, pronouns he, him, his, and I come from curiosity, open-mindedness, and a willingness to try new things.
Thank you. I can't see your eyes, man. That cap is getting some shadow. I mean, look at that beautiful face. Don't you want to see it? So the fourth panel that we have today, it's titled the Applied Theater and the Trauma-Informed panel. Really the goal for this panel is that, and at least for today, after going through this whole weekend, we've talked with a lot of people, we've gotten a lot of information, and I was hoping that this panel, this session, could be a moment to dig a little bit deeper on the more bookish side of the trauma. Before we started, Lizzie was like, the words trauma-informed process are problematic. And I was like, okay. And since then, I have not found new words to move us forward. But where we started off, did you ask them?
Yeah, it's often now referred to as healing-centered practices.
Healing-centered. Well, then there we go. Thank you. See, I told you were on here for a reason.
That's good to me too.
So how we're going to go about this panel is folks have things they're going to present. They're going to get about 12 minutes each to present. And then we're going to have a larger conversation. Then we'll open it up to folks on the audience for feedback, questions, concerns, comments, all of the above. And we are just going to start down on that side with Kurt.
Thank you. Forgive my reading this, but I have attention deficit disorder, and this keeps me on point. Otherwise, I would wander off into many valleys. My overriding statement is I am an artist who does healing work that is therapeutic. I'm not a therapist who does healing work that is artistic, and I never forget the difference. And my paper is titled Trauma Informed, Healing Centered, Restorative Justice Practices. Trauma happens to everyone, but the way you respond to it determines its impact on your brain and body. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. Many human beings suffer some form of trauma in their lives, even in the best of situations. In the impoverished sectors of our communities, racism, poverty, domestic abuse, neighborhood violence, addiction, absent parents, and other societal traumas get dumped on our most vulnerable populations. I come from a place of abuse, addictions, anxiety, bullying, depression, isolation, loneliness, mistrust, shame, suicide, trauma, violence, and worthlessness. I am the collateral damage ripe with despair. You can smell it on me. To survive, I learned to feel nothing. There is a living death wandering the periphery of life, carrying a broken heart. Khalil Gibran said, many of us spend our whole lives running from feeling, with the mistaken belief that you cannot bear the pain. But you have already borne the pain. What you have not done is feel all you are beyond that pain. A common societal belief is that children are born innocent and uncorrupted, but some children are born into environments that are dangerous, corrosive, noxious, and deadly. The adaptive skills that these children raised in these toxic communities learn are all too often survival skills, not constructive life skills. Richard Rohr said, if we do not transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it, usually to those closest to us, our families, our neighbors, our co-workers, and invariably the most vulnerable, our children. Hurt people indeed hurt people. Nathan Phillips said, sometimes at the bottom of the heart, you just can't get the words out. Trauma is a mental injury, not mental illness. There is no talk therapy that will heal trauma. There are no drugs that will cure trauma. There are no addictions that will abate trauma. Judith Herman said, after a traumatic experience, the human system of self-preservation seems to go into permanent alert, as if the danger might return at any moment. To assist trauma victims to heal, they must come to understand what's happening in their traumatized brain while the traumatic event is occurring, as well as how they are held hostage by treating cues that activate trauma going forward. Gabor Mate said, trauma is not what happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside you as a result of what happened to you. Trauma is a psychic wound that hardens you psychologically and then interferes with your ability to grow and develop. Trauma is the scarring that makes you less flexible, more rigid, less feeling, and more defended. During a traumatic event, the brain is primed to respond reflexively to ensure survival. But that same defensive response also keeps trauma victims trapped in the continuous cycle of trauma memory. Trauma memory paralyzes us in our catastrophe. We become frozen in our past. Our personal identity becomes deeply associated with the trauma. Eckhart Tolle said, as long as you make an identity for yourself out of pain, you cannot be free of it. You are not responsible for your trauma, but you are 100% responsible for healing your trauma. Trauma-informed practice assists in unsticking us from our catastrophe. Sometimes in the middle of our trauma activation, a space opens that can create a path to healing. Trauma is healed in increments, not all at once. Over the the healing process, we untether ourselves from the catastrophe of our trauma as we integrate our trauma experience and consign it to our past. Although our trauma memory will remain, our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn stress responses to our trauma will not. We give our past positive momentum through deep introspection, reflection, and finding our personal language for our painful emotions, pain-filled memories, and previous negative behaviors. By understanding our past, we come to understand where we came from, what values and virtues were instilled in us as children, what life experiences shaped us into who we became, why we did the things we did, how we arrived at our present situation, and who we are and who we can become. When we unpack our life story with others and take responsibility for our past behaviors, we come to understand that although our deeds will live on in our victims' memories and perhaps in the public record, we do not have to be remembered for our worst actions. Through accountability, atonement, and redress, we have the possibility to seek acceptance, because our past is but a portion of the whole of our life that will not be completed until we die. One of the beginning steps in trauma-informed process is to address the shame attached to our trauma, which creates a secret world. In that hidden domain, our trauma and attached shame are kept buried, supported by our fear that if our trauma and shame are revealed, we will be obliterated. We see our trauma as a part of our identity, and yet because by its very nature, trauma is unintegrated experience, this secluded part of ourselves creates a living alienation that is difficult, often impossible to bear. Jim Carrey said, "The feeling of wholeness is different than the feeling of meanness. To feel whole, we must let go of trying to hold on to the image of me." Uncovering the source of our behavior is different from blaming our actions on past experiences. The former offers a mirror for why we are who we are, and a chance to move toward who we can be, whereas blaming our actions on a traumatic past assumes that our trauma identity is fixed and our human development is at an end. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." Penitentiaries, jails, and detention centers are sequestered, secretive, and self-contained societies. Penal institutions are our society's human scrap heaps, the dumping ground and epicenter of unresolved trauma, shame, and guilt in our world. Prisons dispose of the human being, not the crime. Christopher Blackwell said, "The word rehabilitation is thrown around a lot in the criminal justice system. But the truth is that prisons are just about the last place anyone should expect to become a better person. Prisons allow hate and violence to fester and intensify, far from being places where a prisoner can reflect on their actions. Prisons perpetuate prisoners in survival mode. To reduce recidivism rates, our American correctional system was focused on reforming the antisocial behaviors of the prisoners through security, safety, healing of trauma, purposeful activities, respect, reintegration, and resettlement. For human beings who find themselves confined within the boundaries of institutional correction, their innate childhood goodness still lives on within them. Space must be created for this human goodness to be called forth. Viktor Frankl said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. If we hold tightly to our anger and resentments, there will be no room in our hearts for love, and that will destroy our lives." A desired outcome in the process of correctional reformation is transformation. For the perpetrators engaged in transformational process, the permission to dream brings the gift of hope. Hope lives at the core of human transformation. Hope is a memory of the future. Hope begins with the possibility of self-forgiveness. Hannah Arendt said, "Without being forgiven, released from the consequences of what we have done, our capacity to act would be confined to one single deed from which we would never recover. We would remain the victim of its consequences forever." Franny Lou Hammer said, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." Shakespeare Behind Bars focuses on society's marginalized populations, including the disenfranchised, disfavored, disinherited, and those who stand with their backs against a wall. Antipholus of Ephesus in Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors says, "Who will deliver justice to me for these deep shames and great indignities?" Shakespeare Behind Bars focuses on personal transformation by using the tools of art, theater, the collected works of William Shakespeare, and original writing to question, examine, and unpack what it means to be a human being. Ophelia said, "We know what we are, but know not what we may be." Shakespeare Behind Bars participants are deeply engaged in personal liberation by remaking their lives as they seek redemption through redefining themselves by reflection, responsibility, reparations, restoration, and restarting their life. Caesar in Antony and Cleopatra said, "Make not your thoughts your prisons." Rather than recalling past traumatic events, the goal of Shakespeare Behind Bars is to establish a state of social engagement within a circle of truth. The circle of truth is a sanctuary of shared presence, which uplifts truth, no matter how difficult, guilt-ridden, or shame-filled. The circle of truth embraces our core values of accountability, acceptance, agency, authenticity, confidentiality, empathy, hope, humanity, inclusivity, kindness, listening, love, non-judgment, personal responsibility, reflection, respect, and the art of silence. Sitting in the circle of truth, there is always invitation, never invasion, always opportunity, never demand. The circle of truth is a place where injured human beings can join in community with other injured human beings to explore the paradoxes of human behavior. Sometimes the human beings most injured from the inside are the ones most willing to help others. The true heroes are those who, in the process of bearing their own pain, lift others up and offer their personal reflections. In seeing ourselves, even the most shameful part of ourselves, we know that we are not alone. In the circle of truth community, we don't have to suffer in isolation. We can sit on the rim of the circle and simply be broken until we decide we are ready to begin our journey toward wholeness. Parker Palmer said, "Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as an integral part of life." Rather than questioning what the meaning of our life is, we must contemplate what our life is asking of us. Hamlet said, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." The only way to heal our trauma is to be able to give our trauma form and shape through developing our own personal language, to talk about it, and our own personal timeline for healing it. Punishing perpetrators who have caused harm must have a balance between accountability and habilitation. In the end, punishment neither requires nor brings about accountability from perpetrators. As those who have caused harm seek to reform themselves, they must reimagine their lives and legacy to include more than the worst things they have done. Although the transformational conclusion might not end in forgiveness from the victims for the perpetrators of harm, it is a form of redemption. They say, "I am a conviction, a product of my addiction, responsible for my eviction into this world of restriction." They say, "I'm society's affliction, who received its benediction in the criminal courts of crucifixion because of my depravity and dereliction." They say, "I'll spend the rest of my life in constriction, driven by my antisocial predilections, culminating in an act of infliction that led me to this jurisdiction." But I say, I am a contradiction. I am not this criminal depiction. And I will use my words and my diction to make a positive prediction. My salvation will not be science fiction. I am more than my own nonfiction. I will embrace my regeneration by becoming the creator of my innovation. Through the gracious gift of sanctification, I will make this declaration: I am more than the coefficient of friction betwixt my mother's submission, my father's emission, and my lifetime of omission. Thank you.
It feels weird to not at least say something back to that. So we can do a just quick popcorn. What are the things that stuck out to you that you would just like to throw back out at us real quick? For me, I have trauma as unintegrated experience stuck out to me. The space for human goodness, social engagement within a circle of trust. What is life asking of us was a big one that stuck out for me. And then Feel all you are beyond that pain was the phrase that also stuck out to me. Anything from the audience?
Trauma is a mental injury, not a mental illness.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Trauma is a trauma. Go ahead.
Oh, trauma is a mental injury, not a mental illness.
Amen.
Anybody else? No pressure. Cool. Oh, yes, please.
He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna shift on over this way to you, Oz.
I've been pretty much doing this work since 2003, so a little over 20 years. I started out as a teaching artist with an organization called Storycatchers Theater. We taught people how to create original musical plays based on their personal life stories, and the majority of the people that we worked with were incarcerated youth. So we worked at facilities like the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, the Illinois Youth Centers in Chicago, Warrenville, and St. Charles. And it was pretty good. I did that for, like I said, a little over 20 years. My background is in music, theater, multimedia design, and community outreach. So I will say that this work called me. Initially, I was trying to be the next Denzel Washington and Kanye West, but the work kept calling out to me. And I found, that when I went into these facilities, I will say that when I did go into these facilities, initially it was just a job for me, right? Like I was a thriving actor. I needed a job to pay rent in between auditions, and I got this job, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, you're gonna go into these facilities, okay. But when I got into the facilities, I saw I was like 20 years old, and to see kids that were in there, they were 16, 17, 18, sometimes 19, sometimes my age, and to see that they came from my same neighborhood, and I started hearing their stories, and it was like, oh man, this is crazy, like I'll never forget the first time I worked at Warrenville. OIC Warrenville was an all-female facility at the time, and there was a young lady that was in there because her mom was on drugs, and her boyfriend was basically like a pimp. And he told the young lady, when you turn 13, I'm gonna put you on the street, and you're gonna make money for me, And when her 13th birthday came, he tried to deliver on that, and he tried to be her first. She fought him off. She ran out of the house. They lived in Illinois, but in the boondocks, like, one of those places where the next house is maybe a mile away, She fought him off, got to his car, drove it. She didn't know how to drive. She ran an intersection, and she hit another car. And she ended up injuring the person in the other car. When she goes to court, the mom didn't show up. The boyfriend showed up. And of course, he testified against her. The narrative that he gave was she was this like wild child, right? And so if you don't know this, if you ever have a serious case and you can't get anybody to show up for you, you can't get community members, a teacher, or anybody, it does reflect like badly. So this child had no one to show up to say, no, I think something else is going on. So she was painted as a wild child, and she was basically, and because she hit someone and injured them, and the person that was injured, their thought is, this kid, I don't know this kid, so what this guy's saying about her must be true. All I know is she shouldn't have been driving, and she ran an intersection, and now I have this injury that I'm gonna have to live with for the rest of my life. I want her in jail, right? And so she was sentenced to juvenile life, which means that you can be there till you're 18 or till you're 21. It just depends on the judge. And so I met her working with Storycatchers Theater, and she told this story. I think we were the first people that she told this story to us. And we performed it, and when she told her story, all of a sudden all these other girls started telling their story. I was actually raped. I was touched by my best friend. I was touched by my uncle. They all got the strength, and I'll never forget it. They told it with this song called Pitter Patter, because it happened on a rainy night. And it was like, these are the things that happen on the dark and stormy night. So just when I thought that was the worst story that I could hear, every time I went in, there was some kid that just kept topping the story. And the more those stories got topped, the bigger my mind opened, the bigger my heart. And I was just like, okay, I feel a calling to do this work and to find a way to be basically the person to help them put their words into songs, into lyrics, to find a way to depict these things so that they can tell the community members and their parents. Some parents never knew why their kids had certain behaviors, especially their daughters. Usually this was the case with daughters, that they were sexually assaulted at some point and then their behavior changed. And the parent is just thinking, my daughter is a hormonal teenager and she's just being wild, but she had this experience that for whatever reason she didn't tell the parents about, and it had changed them to the core, and now they were doing things that were outside of their normal behavior, things that unfortunately got them locked away. So I did this work for about a little over 20 years, as I told you, and so in 2023, I got accepted into Northwestern University in a PhD program for learning sciences. And I knew going in that what I was going to do was that my research was going to be around how does interdisciplinary arts help marginalized communities develop self-agency and recover from trauma. And that's pretty much what my research has been on. So this past fall, I got an opportunity to go in with Kurt. This was my second year working for him. So when I worked for him in 2023, I just went in as a teaching artist, and I ran this program at the Illinois Youth Center, Chicago. When I went in this year, I still went in as a lead teaching artist, but also went in as a researcher. And initially what I wanted to, there was a couple of things that I was looking to research. The first thing I wanted to see, could Shakespeare Behind Bars and a program like Shakespeare Behind Bars be what's called a protective program with protective factors? There's this researcher, his last name is Howell. If you look up Howell et al., protective factors or protective programs, you'll see his research. And he says that when it comes to working with incarcerated youth, that it's important that you have programs that treat the residents like humans and not criminals. To Kurt's point, he said, "I'm not my crime," right? So if you're going in with an arts education program, any type of program, are you looking at the individuals like humans, or are you looking at them like criminals? Are you looking at the socio-emotional and socio-cultural things that attribute to who they are and what they're going through when they're in front of you? So that was one thing that I was looking at. The other thing I was looking at was, could a program like Shakespeare Behind Bars help improve empathy? Because a lot of the young men that we work with, especially if they're gang affiliate, if you're familiar with, I'm trying to think of that movie, but if you understand, like, there was a study done a couple of years ago that compared children from Africa and war-torn places in Africa that had been desensitized by different military factions, because they would go get the kids, they would desensitize them, and now they have killing machines that they could just sing. And there was another person who interviewed young people who were gang affiliated in Chicago, and he basically found out that it's the same process, that the process that's happening in Africa and the process that's happening on the south and west side of Chicago, it's the same process. Gangs are finding younger and younger kids, they're filling their heads with things to desensitize them. They want them to they want to be able to say, "Hey, that's your op over there, go and kill him," and have the kid not think twice about it. So I wanted to see if a program like this could help reestablish empathy within these young people. The third thing that I was looking for is, does a program like Shakespeare Behind Bars help to improve communication skills in a lot of different ways? And then the fourth thing that I was looking for was, does a program like Shakespeare Behind Bars help with future orientation? So when I pitched this, my professor was like, "That's a lot." they're like, "Those are all good questions. That's a lot. You need to pick one of those to just like focus on." I doubt in this 12-week session that you're gonna like, you know, get the data that you need to definitively address any of that. So I decided to go with feature orientation. And when I went in with, initially when I went in, my definition of feature orientation was, can I get kids to consider or think about or create what most of us would call a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, right? Like, what are you gonna be doing a year from now? What are you gonna be doing from 5 years? And how are you gonna like make that happen? What steps are you gonna take? And so, I'm still working on the full analysis of that paper right now, but I did write a paper that was a preliminary analysis. It was based on the first 6 weeks of the program. And in that first 6 weeks, I identified 4 types of future orientation. One was survival-based future orientation. One was professional future orientation, educational future orientation, and social emotional future orientation. And what my research is telling me is that these 4 types of future orientation, they happen simultaneously and they are interconnected. So one person can be excelling in one form of communication and one form of feature orientation while regressing in another. To give you a quick case study, we had a young man named Nate, and I'm using the aliases. You guys might be like, who is Nate? Because Kevin's a part of the project too, so you might be like, who is Nate? So I'm using an alias that I use in the research. So we had a young man named Nate. And so Nate wrote his personal narrative. So with these guys, they created personal narratives, and then we turned them into audiobooks at the end of the 12 weeks. So Nate's personal narrative was about how he lost 4 cousins in a 2-year time period to gun violence. His first cousin that he lost, Kahari was the person, he was kind of like the provider of the family. Like Nate came from a family that was experiencing poverty. So his cousin Kahari was out in the streets, he was selling, he was dealing, but he always had money, he always had nice cars. And he would come and pull up on Nate and be like, hey, here's some money for your family. So Kahari was murdered, and Nate said he remembered getting the call, and he remembers hopping on his bike and riding like 3 miles to get to the scene of the crime. And when he got there, the guys that were in this gang, he was like, they were all just getting high because they didn't know how to deal with the loss. And he said, I never cried. He said, I just sat there with the guys, I looked at them put the sheet over Kahari, and then he said somebody, like passed me like a blunt, and he's like, I just like escaped. So fast forward a little longer, a little more down the road, he said he had a female cousin who she was driving, and someone pulled up on the side of her and shot at the car, and she crashed. And his mom was in the car with her. And so he said initially, sometimes people don't have the whole story and they just like telling information. So initially the phone call that he got was that his mom had died in the car accident. And so he said he cried for the first time and he prayed to God for the first time. And his prayer was, please don't let my mom be gone. Please don't let my mom be gone. And he said an hour later he got a phone call saying that his mom was alive, but that his cousin was dead. And this female cousin was also pregnant at the time that she died. And he said he cried again. So, and then he told me about 2 other cousins and how they died. So in that example of him telling those stories and writing those stories and us working on those stories, that would be an example of, for him, social, emotional, future orientation coming along. His first loss, he didn't cry. His second loss, he cried and he prayed to God. And subsequently, the 3rd and 4th loss, he said that they taught him to cherish his people a little bit more, to cherish every moment with everybody that he loves, because he doesn't know when they're gonna be gone. So again, that's the acceleration in social emotion. So at the same time that we were writing that story and working on that story, we were still having other workshops. Like we would split we had For this study, we met with the kids twice a week. We would work with them for 2 hours a day. Usually it was like Wednesdays from like 4:30 to 6:30, Sundays from 12:30 to 2:30. We did have an incident where the kids in our program didn't get along, something happened and it had to be split, so it kind of messed with our time because instead of having one group for 2 hours a day, we now had to have two groups where we only got to work with for 1 hour. And then they'd leave and the second group will come in because they couldn't be together because of their gang affiliations or their problems that they couldn't work out, which gave us less time. So we're working with him on this thing, and it's kind of crazy because we're splitting this hour that we have with this one group into, we're like, all right, can we teach them how to act? Can we teach them voice control? Can we teach them how to write? Can we talk about Shakespeare? Can we do all like, it's like a gauntlet that we're running within like this 1 hour, right? And so, you know, I'd have like 10 minutes to work with him on the story, but then we have 10 minutes where like Kevin or our other teaching artist, Jen, will bring in things. So one day Jen's like, hey, I felt like we're getting too heavy. Like the stuff that we're doing is being too dark. It's all about like death and murder. And, you know, she's like, I just want to try something different. Can we bring in something about? She's like, I'm curious about the first time they like fell in love or had a crush. You know, I'm like, okay, I get it. Yeah, I've been doing this for so long that it is, you know,
desensitized.
Yeah, I kind of know what I'm gonna hear when I go in. So you know, unless these days the threshold is pretty high to top what the last kid told me. You know what I mean? So this was Jen's first time kind of working. So I was like, yeah, I get it. Okay, let's switch gears. So she brought in the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. And so we read through it, and she's asking the kids questions like, hey, when Romeo calls Juliet the sun, what does that mean? You know? And the kids are like, oh, it means that she's bright. She's brightening up his life. It means she's hot like the sun. You know? Like, they're giving all this stuff, and it's like, okay, cool. And Nate was giving like a bunch of like cool answers too, you know? And so, also, what was happening, they were kind of answering the questions, but they were also posturing because they wanted us and each other to know that they players, right? You know, so at the same time that they were answering the questions, they were also doing stuff, saying stuff like one kid, Arnie, he was like, I don't get that tingly feeling that I used to get about girls.
15 years old.
Yeah. You know, see, he like, I don't give my heart to a girl or my mind to a girl. It's a gut reaction. And that's how, you know, and my dude's like, yeah, I only like girls that like me, you know what I'm saying? You know, so, and then all of a sudden, Nate just goes, man, before I say that, Arnie goes, man, Romeo's just a virgin. He ain't had none, so that's why he chasing up behind Juliet so hard, because he ain't had none. And then they all start going like, yeah, I'll never let a girl, all that stuff, right? And so I'm sitting there like, and Jen is like, I kind of knew it was coming, but Jen is like, well, okay, you know what I mean? And so then, basically, like, all of a sudden, Nate just goes, man, I used to be like Romeo. I used to talk to these bitches. Man, bitches nowadays be like, blah, 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 blah. And at the time, I'm like, Jen is leading the class. I'm sitting there in research mode, right? So I hear this, and part of my brain is like, you're a researcher doing ethnographic researcher. Don't intervene, just let it play out. Right? The teaching artist side of me and just regular odds is like, ooh, he just, ooh, 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 ooh. You know what I mean? And so I'm kind of torn, and like he's still going, like I'm having these thoughts in like split seconds, right? And I kind of look up, and Jen is kind of looking at me. She wants to say something, but she's fearful that she might come off too hard, right? And so all of a sudden, like as I look up and Jen makes eye contact to me, and I'm like, okay, I need to switch back into teacher artist mode and address this. All of a sudden, I hear this voice go, "Hey, I don't feel like being a bitch today." And then it's Miss McMorris in the back, you know? And the kid goes, I didn't call you that. She's like, you just called all women that. I'm a woman. I don't feel like being that today. And then he was like, okay.
Mr. McMorris was the CEO in the room,
Yeah.
child specialist.
Yeah. So, going back to the research with the different future orientations, in that instance, you can see that, well, he was expressing himself to us, right? And also what we found out is that the other guys later on in that, they kind of outed him. They said that basically there's a possibility that he might have gotten a call from a girl that he was dating 3 days prior, and she might have broken up with him over the phone. You know, like, hey, you in there too long, or she might have told him that she had been unfaithful or something like that. So in that instance, you can see that you could kind of make the case that he was excelling with social emotional, because that was a social emotional, him being comfortable enough with us to share his feelings and on some level to display that hurt that he was having from that previous call, right? But at the same time, he was regressing in professional future orientation because he did take in consideration mixed company. And that's exactly what happened after that. Like, I put my teaching artist hat on, I stopped taking my field notes, and I gave the guys a conversation on what it means to code switch and what it means to be in mixed company. So that's essentially how those future orientations are presenting themselves in the work. Right now, I'm really focusing on what does the survival-based future orientation mean, because that's the first point. So the way I'm defining survival-based future orientation is when we first meet the kids, everything is transactional, right? They don't know us, they don't trust us, they don't know what our purpose is. Even if we tell them that we're there to like try and put goodness in their life, they don't believe it because so many people have told them that before and have let them down. So it's kind of like, you got to show me that you're really here for me. And that normally takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months to build that relationship to where they really know that you are there for them. And unfortunately, by the time we get to that point, the program is ending, you know? So those, especially that first month, is very transactional. They're like, and the transaction is cut time. So the facility gives you cut times. If they do programs, they can get anywhere from 3 to 7 days a month cut from their sentence. Okay? They have to come to program, they have to complete the program, they have to be successful in the program. But a program like Shakespeare Behind Bars can get them 21, if they complete it, can get them 21 days off their cut time. So a lot of times when they come in the door, it's like, I don't really care what you people are talking about, I'm just here for the cut time. And we kind of try and turn that around. So right now, in my research, survival-based future orientation is not necessarily a good thing because, and it suggests that they understand the inner workings of prison life and prison institution. So they're coming and saying, I'm going to cooperate with you if the prison gives me this. If the prison doesn't give me this, then I'm not going to come to your program because they know that they have that power and there's nothing that we can do about it. So yeah, that's pretty much my research and my work right now.
I'll give like a quick 15 seconds for any pop-outs from the audience. A few things from me. What you were saying about if no one shows up to the hearing, then it automatically just puts the kid in a bad light. Like if even it made me go, oh, if a community member, like a teacher or a neighbor, you know, is able to show up and having that community connection, just that small one, can go leaps and bounds. But any pop-outs from the audience?
I really like the mention of like how desensitization in victims inevitably perpetrates violence because the cycle is like limiting. And I think like I just really love that you added that into the beginning.
Could you say that third? It's 4 types of future orientation: survival, professional, something, and social emotional.
Education. Survival, professional, educational, and social emotional.
Thank you, Oz.
No problem.
Next up, the wonderful Lizzie May.
Hi, I'm Lizzie May. I taught in Chicago Public Schools. I was a special education teacher and a theater teacher arts-based nonprofits, got into the trauma-informed sphere, and then went to California to get my master's at Berkeley in educational leadership, where I did research at the schools that I was working at, which I will give you more information on in a moment. But I want to address the trauma-informed thing. Because there's a California-based researcher, Sean Gimwright. He's a black man and he works with black boys, mostly adolescents. And he was like, we're doing trauma-informed. And they were like, we don't like being defined by the worst thing that's happened to us. We don't like being considered as like trauma victims, which obviously none of us would. So he coined the phrase healing centered, which is about, and actually it reminds me about what Mark was saying yesterday in the nonprofit forum about shifting language from dismantling systems of violence to imagining communities of hope and respect and resilience. So this kind of shift from trauma informed, which is essentially negative orientation, towards healing centered, which is moving towards healing, is not my idea. But I think it's great. And the other thing I want to say about that is I'm a white woman, probably obvious. I'm a queer white woman. I have spent my career working in communities of color as somebody who has had to build trust across lines of racial difference and other difference. And I think one of the most important facets of trauma-informed work is anti-racism. Because it's like, what is the trauma? What is the trauma? The trauma is the direct effects of a hetero-patriarchal, white supremacist culture that is doing exactly what it is designed to do. So any trauma-informed practitioner, instead of orienting towards the trauma, should orient towards the trauma-producing systems and work as hard as possible to push, tear, I don't know, reimagine, rebuild, whatever. And as a white person, that is so important to do personally, because whiteness is so violent and causes so much harm all the time. And so I think as a trauma-informed practitioner, healing-centered practitioner who is white, one of the most important things to me is getting ready for feedback. That is one of the most important ways that I build trust in communities of color that have welcomed me to whatever degree, is just having my feet on the ground and be ready for feedback, which is a daily practice. And obviously that work should not have to come from the people giving me feedback. I try to do, I try to do my reflection and everything, and there's just going to be ways that I still cause harm because of my whiteness. And actually, I would also say that that moment of feedback is an opportunity for building relationship, because another facet of white supremacy is conflict avoidance. That like if somebody tells you something's wrong with you, it's the end of the world, you have to throw yourself off the bridge. But in fact, like there's something wrong with all of us. And so in a moment of real relating, where somebody's telling me something that I could do differently, that is a huge moment to build relationship, and that is trauma-informed. Which reminds me of what Michael Road was saying yesterday about theater is a model, theater can be a model for different practices of coalition building. So that type of opening to conflict, receptivity, push and pull, real meeting each other is coalition building. We have to do that to build coalition to move forward. And so what I do is build coalition mostly with young people, which brings me to my research. When I was in the Bay Area, I was the assistant director of instructional practices for 4 schools that educated students who had been kicked out of their public school placement. So and we served K through 12, it gets more and more kids the older you go. If you're in kindergarten and you hit your teacher or you throw a desk, you're coming to us. And then that just escalates as the years go on. Okay, so these students have openly, vocally, bravely resisted schooling structures that did not serve them. Because all of my students had different identities that are oppressed. They're all neurodiverse, they all have a disability that's been identified. Vast majority of them are non-white. 10% of them are queer, identifying 6% are genderqueer. And then they've all experienced compound traumas because of the neighborhoods they're in, communities they're in, systemic disenfranchisement of these places. That being said, there's a way to go through all that and sit quietly in class and just get passed through. And they did not do that. They resisted oppressive schooling structures to the point where the teacher was like, I can't have you in class anymore. And the school was like, I can't have you in class anymore. And the state of California pays $140,000 a year for those children to go to these therapeutic day schools that I worked at, where they have a therapist, where they have group therapy every day, where the class sizes have to be smaller than 13. So in a way, their actions are deeply self-advocating, right? That being said, the therapeutic day schools are not always so therapeutic, as probably some of you know. So at these schools, there is a use of physical restraint. So adults will hold like the child's arm or like leg in situations where the child is a threat to themselves or others. That determination is deeply, deeply racialized. So I saw that the Black students at my schools were getting restrained 40% disproportionate to their enrollment. Does that stat make sense? Okay, cool. Yeah, so like if 30% of the kids are Black, they're getting restrained 70% of the time. Which the staff, so once I found this data point, I was like, people don't know, they don't know. I just have to tell everybody that this is happening, like this is gonna be, alarm bells are ringing, and I am loud. I have 3 planets in Leo, and I was just like, in every single room that I was in, I was like, blah, 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 blah. Now, unfortunately, everybody knew. So my tactic 1 was cast to the side. I was like, okay, we gotta try something different. And that's when I was in grad school, so I started doing, and I'm an artist, so I started doing research on arts integrated practices and how can arts integration work here. Because I was interviewing kids who were getting restrained a lot, and there was this one girl, I'll also give her an alias, Mary. And she was a 9th grader. She was a Black girl, and she was as tall as me, 5'10". And she would say, the staff don't understand me, but because I'm big, they think I'm dangerous, so they just go ahead and restrain me. If I'm having a bad day, boom, I'm just gonna get in a restraint. She's like, you see other kids do the same thing that I'm doing, and they're not getting in restraints. So there was this lack of relational trust, right, between the staff and the students. There was this lack of interest in contextualizing the students' actions, and there was an assumption of threat that's racialized and gendered deeply. So I'm thinking, okay, arts integrated practices can be bias mitigating, right? Because they give the youth a chance to express from their own perspectives. And so adults interacting with that youth expression are then drawn into the conversation about who she really is and what's really going on with her in such a way that is more humanizing and dignifying that will hopefully decrease restraint. So I started doing these arts integration adult learning groups with staff. Because it was clear to me, as it's probably clear to you here in the story, that this is actually not a student issue at all. It's actually about shifting the mindsets of the staff. So, I was doing arts integration with these staff, and we would do a different art form every time. So we were doing dance, we were doing choreographies, and the staff were rolling on the floor, because I had them embody the movements that they saw their students doing throughout the day. So they're rolling on the floor. And then, in the next session, I'd be like, okay, how did you use what we learned? And they would say, oh, our kids were rolling down the hallway, which usually we'd be like, get up, like, you know, there's like a compliance thing, right? And they'd be like, instead we just decided to do it with them because we felt like in the learning community that it was actually kind of felt good, like it felt kind of like regulating to like have that pressure of the floor. So then instead of the kids getting escalated by the adults insisting on their compliance, you have adults and children rolling down the hall together. In another instance, what they were doing, like, yeah, it's cool, I think it's cool. I'm gonna do an asterisk here about embodiment. white supremacist education is fundamentally disembodied. It doesn't allow the body into the classroom. It's like we're doing worksheets, we're learning facts, especially for children of color because we're training them for prison. So there's no sense of like embodiment, imagination, and freedom. So, whereas, like, there's this researcher, Dr. Blue Wakpa, in the University of Washington, and she does research on indigenous epistemologies of dance, and she talks about, like, indigenous cultures and their relationship to dance as a way that they root themselves in space and time and project into an imagined futurity. It just means future, I shouldn't have said it like that. An imagined future from this communal and contextualized indigenous past, and it is the dance itself that is the way that this happens. So it's dance as a form of knowing, it's dance as a form of learning, it's dance as cultural, it's dance as imagining together. So inviting the body into that adult learning space is also a trauma-informed thing to do because trauma, yes, is a mental injury, but we know it's in the body because the body keeps us going. So trauma's in the body. When we can bring the body into schools, which is what teaching artists do all the time, right? That's it, already inherently trauma mitigating, resilience promoting, and culture affirming for many non-white youth. And I mean, there are white cultures too that really prioritize the body that have been also disappeared in this project of schooling. So, okay, they're rolling. And I'm gonna tell you another story. Maybe two. We did visual art another time, doing, coloring and stuff, and talking about all these different things, and then the next week they came back, okay, how have you used that this week? And this person really told me the story, the staff at the school told me the story that this little boy was escalating, blowing up to the point where they usually would have had to put hands on him, and she yelled, "Do you want to draw?" And the boy said, "Yes!" And then she just gave him paper and crayons, and he literally drew it out, and then she told that story to his mom, and his mom was like, he used to love to draw, like that used to be his favorite thing to do. So it's again, I think the story explains itself. I'm not gonna put a button on it. So what I will say is this though, we saw a decrease in the use of restraints. We did not see a decrease in the disproportionate racialization of restraints. So, obviously anti-blackness and fear of the black body is something that is so deeply ingrained in the American school system and American society that the length of my research, didn't have an effect on it, and that maybe we need to try different methods. I guess I will also say that the staff at the schools was extremely diverse. However, the leadership of the schools was white. So I think that has a huge role to play. I think me as somebody who was working at 4 schools had less impact than somebody who's running the school, who would say like, this is the, I think there's like this is the school policy. We do this, and this before we restrain, or just making that concentrated move. And I think the whiteness of the school administration was certainly standing in the way of that happening. And then, given that a lot of the school staff were people of color, the vast majority, and when I was interviewing them about the experience of restraining kids, they were like, I cry, like it feels locked up in my body, I feel frozen, I get numb, like they're having a traumatic experience as well. Very much so. And then some of them are also replicating harm that they experienced in school. So then there's this just exponential experience of trauma for these staff. So I think a big thing that I took away from my project is we're losing educators left and right. They're dropping like flies with this crisis of teachers in America because the teachers themselves lack resilience promoting, trauma mitigating strategies. They don't have tools for getting these poisons out of their body, for telling their stories. I think art could be an enormous tool to use with our adult workforce in schools as a way to rehumanize, redignify them. Because the other thing is, we all know this, you cannot teach what you don't know. You're not going to teach a child to regulate and you've never been regulated a day in your life.
Yeah.
You can say, oh, journal. Girl, where? Like, I think I'm going to wrap it there, but I would encourage us as a room full of social justice theater makers to turn the lens towards adults, perhaps, in terms of these practitioners and how we can kind of, though I was really interested in what you said, that you won over a lot of employees at the prison by the work that you were doing. So then it's like, that was really interesting to me. So that's something to think about. Dance, something to think about as well. And then so that wraps up my research presentation. I would just like to take a moment because like I said, I taught in CPS for a long time, and this weekend I lost one of my very first students to gun violence. And he's not the first student that I lost, but he was one of my very first students. And I was a first-year teacher. I was 23. On the south side of Chicago, recruited by Teach for America. I had grown up on the north side, you know what I mean? I've never been to Washington Park in my life. And I was in these classrooms, and these kids came to me after school and said, hey, we want a poetry club. And I had never written a poem in my life. And I was like, okay, sure. So once a week, I just opened my classroom door, and these kids would just spill in, and I didn't teach them a thing. It was that they needed the space and an adult body. And they were like, she's soft, she'll do it. They just would like come to the front of the room with like these notebooks brimming and just give their poems to each other for an hour straight, these kids. And he was one of them. And his name is Edward. And I just wanted to lift him up in this space because he deserved more.
Thank you for sharing with us. What you were saying about the healing inform, actually, I think you made a note about that to me before, Kurt, actually, about Sean Gainesville. So thank you for bringing that back up. Thank you. A few things that popped out for me there. Trauma-producing system. I think how you were explaining, I think your breakdown of it just maybe has me looking at it in a different perspective. Even as all this information that we've been getting, I'm like, what are the other ways that we can actually handle the adults, because they are the ones in control a lot of the times, and a lot of the work is about going in and working with the kids and trying to help the kids. But it's like, well, you have to help everybody. You can't just help one group. If we're being intersectional, then everyone needs to be addressed. It can't just be a segmented population. And on that note, I'm going to pass it over to you.
I am not going to present research unless you count my 40 years working as an artist in schools as my research.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. And I'm going to do it through the lens of storytelling because I can tell that my panel colleagues here are doing the same. I have been working my entire career in theater and arts education. And I passionately believe that arts are critical to learning, and I believe that access to the arts is access to power and voice. However, we know, if you don't, I will share with you, that access to arts education is incredibly limited and marginalized in our society. Arts education is not prevalent in all schools, in all public schools, and in particular in marginalized communities, arts education doesn't exist. So my entire career has been around bringing artists into schools and being an artist myself, going into school communities, and as Oz said, most artists doing this work don't necessarily get into it by saying, ooh, that's what I want to do, but rather, I need to pay my rent, or I need to eat, and I'm going to do this, and something happens in the experience that catches them and makes them want to do this more. And I think in an idealized situation, my idealized situation, it changes the way they think about their art. Because it is in collaboration. It is in collaboration rather than producing products that are put on stages. I started doing this work myself as an artist in schools and for very nice privileged arts institutions. I taught for them, I created programming for these very privileged arts institutions where in general students signed up for these programs because they wanted to learn about theater. However, when I moved to Chicago 20-some years ago, I started working in Chicago Public Schools. And I found myself working in a lot of schools where students were not signing up to do theater, but rather they were being told they were going to do theater through this theater residency program that was coming in. And I started noticing in the artists that I was working with this sort of mentality around these students are disrespectful. These students are not listening to me. I have these incredible things to share with my students, and they are not listening. They're so disrespectful. And I started witnessing this regularly happening and sort of a flummoxed nature around these artists not knowing what to do. And it occurred to me, well, we've never trained artists how to do this work. I believe that artists have the ability to transform environments, but we are not giving these artists skills or an appreciation and an understanding of why they can't think about dumping their artist skills into these students, but rather engaging students in conversations through art and using the tools of art to explore their own identity, explore their own voice. So I'll give you some scenarios that helped me understand a little bit of what needed to be done. I was working for a theater company that no longer exists, sadly. However, I was working through a residency program where we were taking play into classrooms and creating seat work over a course of a 6-week residency. These students were English students. They didn't sign up for a theater class. Our goal was to get them excited and hooked on theater. And our strategies were about trying to help them engage in the literature in a way that made sense, sort of like Kurt's work is doing. Right? What does this story mean to you? How does it relate to your life? Those were our strategies. As we would go into these school classrooms, we would be encountering teachers, for the most part, who wanted to do something good with their students, but who would say to us, "Oh, don't cast that student. You do not want that student in that role." And our job with that classroom teacher would be to say, "Well, how about if we try it? If it doesn't work, we'll put somebody else in that role." And inevitably, what happened, of course, was that that student caught that role and caught the spark of something that had not yet been ignited. And when it was, that classroom teacher said, "Oh my God, I've never seen that kid that way before. I never knew that was possible." Or that kid doesn't come to class ever, you'll never get them to rehearse. But in fact, they came every single day that we were there to rehearse. And we started noticing these things. I had a teaching artist, again, who was working for me, who came in, and again came from a background of working in lovely arts institutions where students wanted to come in and learn how to act. She was in this program and terrified. She would go into this CPS high school and the kids scared her. And she told me, "These kids, I'm terrified that I'm going to get injured. They're bigger than me, and I'm terrified that they're going to hurt me." And so I would coach her and talk to her and get her through her courses or her residency classes. But midway through, there was this one girl in her class who I will call Alicia. And Alicia was big and she was pretty aggressive. And this teaching artist said to me, I think I'm gonna have to quit. I don't know how to do this, and I'm afraid when I go into the classroom. So I went with her and accompanied her and taught alongside her. And I said, you know what? I think it might be interesting if we put Alicia in this role. Alicia hadn't had a role yet. Alicia was in the background observing. And I said, I think it might be interesting if we put Alicia in this role. And the teaching artist said, no way, she won't come, and I'm afraid that she might get aggressive in the rehearsal. And I said, well, let's just try it. Let's just see. And so we did, and Alicia came to every rehearsal, and Alicia was fantastic. She was dynamic and brilliant on stage. And she went all the way through the rehearsal and up to the point where we are presenting the work on our theater stage. She comes to the theater, she performs her scene. There is a standing ovation for the scene. Alicia takes her curtain call, and the classroom teacher is sitting next to me in the house and says, wow, I have never seen that girl smile. But look at her beam right now. And this was like in April, and he had been in class with her the entire school year, but had not actually seen her smile until that point. And I said to the classroom teacher, isn't that interesting that you have these students in your class who are probably disruptive in your class. They're probably students that you may struggle with in class, but they are actually quite great as actors, right? They are gregarious, they're charismatic, they're very smart, and that translates into really good acting skills, right? And the classroom teacher said to me, yes, that is absolutely true, and that is exactly what the gangs are looking for as well. That's what the gangs are recruiting for, those qualities. And it occurred to me, like, could we do that? Like, right? Could we open this door rather than that door by putting art in schools as a way for students to really discover options and create hopeful scenarios for their future? I had another student who I will call Roberto, who went through this residency program with us. And Roberto wasn't even on stage. Roberto was one of our technical people who helped run the lighting board. But the program wrapped up, and we concluded and thanked all the students. And Roberto, all of a sudden, on the next Monday, after that Saturday performance, knocked on the door of the theater. And I opened up the door and said, Roberto, what are you doing here? It's a Monday, you're supposed to be in school. And he said, yeah, I know, but I just wonder, could I do more of this? Could I come back to the theater and do some more of this kind of work? And I talked to his classroom teacher, and she said, well, yeah, Roberto was expelled, and that's why he was at your front door on Monday, because he couldn't be in school. And I thought, well, but he clearly has enough motivation and desire to seek out an opportunity that made him alive for a period. So can't we change that dynamic? And so I'm going to then segue into one of the things that I discovered in that moment. I had been doing a residency program that went into these schools that didn't have arts programming, and we did a 6-week residency that opened up or turned the light on for some students who otherwise didn't have that light turned on for them, who were sitting in classrooms bored or unable to do the work, and viewed by their teachers as not having what it takes to be successful in school. We were bringing this program in, and I felt really good about that. But when Roberto came to our doors and more of these students came through our doors, I started realizing, well, this isn't right for us to be going into these schools for 6 weeks and doing a program and saying, you're really good at this. you should do more of it, when I know that in the communities where they live, they don't have that option. And so it made me aware as a program director that we need to be creating programming that has further life. We can't open up the lights in the rooms of these students and then walk away and say, good luck with that. And that to me is a really important takeaway from my education as an arts administrator, is that it's one thing to do really beautiful dynamic programming that reaches students, but it's another thing to think about, well, if you are responsible for opening up that window for that student, then you have a responsibility to continue investing in that student. And you have to think about your program models so that you continue to develop programming that is accessible, so those students have steps forward into other opportunities. So that is all to say that one of the things that I do now is I teach at the University of Illinois Chicago in the theater department, and I work with artists. I work as a teaching artist instructor, meaning that I try to expose theater students, BA, BFA theater students, to the world of theater that looks different than what they might imagine theater looking like. And so I teach a course in the fall where I introduce them to the world of teaching artistry, and I have a really heavy lens on social justice in that particular course, where I am trying to expose them to the widened lens of what theater practice looks like and means, and how it is connected to access to voice and identity in marginalized communities. The next semester, I then place those students in internships or teaching assistant roles in various arts organizations throughout the city, so that they can work alongside other teaching artists who are doing this work. And my goal is to match them up with organizations that align with their identity and with their personal aesthetic around art making, and again, expose them to the world outside of performing on stage. I will wrap by saying that I feel like that is something that in the theater training industry, we need to start thinking differently about. We need to help young artists recognize that the only way to study is not about production and performance, but it's about the way you practice your art in collaboration with others.
Yes. That button right there was the buttonest of buttons. The access to arts is access to power. The wider lens of theater practice as an artist, and then that's what the games are looking for. That really stuck out to me, and especially what you're saying about, you know, if you're turning on the lights for these kids and you're not giving them any other space to continue, then what are you actually giving to them? You know, I had a similar experience at ILIC this last fall, where we had one of the residents leaving. He got released early, which was a great celebration, but he was like, how do I keep doing this? And I said, I don't know.
Right.
And this is the reason that we are sitting in this room, you saying, like, how can we create this pipeline? You know, I call it the school to theater pipeline, is what I'm calling it in my head recently. But you can't do theater in school, you gotta do it somewhere. But there needs to be a pipeline, because we have so much evidence that it is a rich field for, 1, self-discovery, 2, forgiveness, 3, identity. Like, there's so much that can come out of it, and if it's not accessible, then it's just kind of information sitting in the air. You don't know what you don't know until you know it. It is 3:51. The next workshop is a split between me, the local ABCO, and the Chicago Children's Theater. So I will just shorten my section of it. So we have time for a few questions from the audience. If you guys have any questions or thoughts you want to bring back out. Barry?
Yeah, I so appreciate everyone's comments sharing this afternoon. I feel there's this real sequence I can't quite identify, but this is flow from like big picture that Kurt presented so ably through these individual stories of what people are doing, in their professional lives. And I guess my question or comment has to do with taking it beyond our individual professional lives and thinking about it in this moment, and thinking about things like what Mark was, addressing in his workshop yesterday, and perhaps in other places as well. Feeling like, how can we enlarge the movement, with the kinds of consciousness and skills that we've been developing in our professional work. And I'm not speaking for myself when I say our. So that's my question.
Comment?
My automatic thought goes to what you were saying in that in practicing the skills, like even being open to feedback, that is practicing the skills, and that is another way of applying it.
And even something as simple as like being willing to get feedback in any space you're in and not taking it personally. I think that is the immediate thing that popped up in my mind. If you have any other things to add, please.
Can you ask your question again?
I was just saying, like, our current moment, right, is pretty dire, and our movement in resistance to that, other things going on is not that focused. And how can the skills that we were sharing, our experiences, and the framework that Kurt so ably really wove together, that I was very struck, from the, to link the, I guess we call it sort of trauma-informed consciousness to the nitty-gritty of the system, as it's reflected in the prison, right? How can we take that consciousness and bring it to the movement in a way that will help build the movement?
I guess I would answer that kind of like events like this. We got to find events to kind of get it out, because like I resonated with your story. I have so many teaching artists that when I used to work for an organization that's not around, I would sometimes have a teaching artist show up, and I would get no notice about this person showing up. They're like, oh, we just hired them, we sent them on your team. And then, and I'm like, oh, okay, and at that point I had been doing this for a while, and I would always, at the end of the first day, I would always have the question in my head, what did they tell this person that they were walking into? Because they seem not to know the population, so to your point, our population were kids that had, their life circumstances had brought us to our door more so than their willingness to come to our door. So, they weren't in our program because they wanted to learn theater. They were in there because some judge or probation officer said, this is you, in order to stay out of jail, you gotta either go to school or you gotta get a job. Or you gotta be in something that we feel is gonna help you develop better as a person. And that's what brought them to our door. So it was kind of like a twisting of the arm, They usually, in 90% of the cases, had no background in theater and no desire to learn, right? And we were working with that, and so we get these teaching artists that came from jobs where they had been working with people who came, in affluent schools or affluent communities where the kids wanted to be actors, singers, dancers. They were triple threats, and they just wanted someone to pour. And I was like, this is not. And so those teachers would come in and be like, why can't you get these kids to stop cussing? And why can't you get this? And why can't you? And I'm like, and I'd be like, did you not read the job description? Did you not know you were coming to work with incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, trauma,
But they
trying to
have
involve, you know.
But, they have to work through so many, just like what you were saying, Lisa,
Yeah.
right? Like, they've got to do a lot of self-reflection
Yeah.
around, like, well, what am I bringing in here? Like, I'm the expert, right? And I want to create art, right? And they have to do a lot of, like, layer shedding to understand that's not what this is about.
Yeah.
And even along with there, for me, like a good part of anti-racism for me is folks just being able to say, like, I'm not the one that's supposed to be giving information. I'm not, because even saying, like, I'm going to give you this information, that's another sort of, I'm going to conquer your mind. I'm going to place what information I want in your mind and you're going to take it. But the thing is, I feel like our responsibility as teaching artists is to say, these are the tools that are available to you.
That's right.
How would you like to use them?
Exactly.
Let me play with you.
Exactly.
Yeah. And to your point, training the trainer was important. Like sometimes I would have to like kind of create like my own little like side school.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm not. When you come today, I'm gonna get the kids started, and I just need to have some one-on-one meetings with you to explain the layout of the land before I allow you to integrate because you're gonna do more harm than good. So that training the trainer component, I think, is very important. To your point, I think it's very important for people to be able to admit what they don't know.
Yes.
When they walk in the room and things look different than what they expect, to your point, not try to enforce your expectations. That's where conflict comes. When I have this expectation and I walk in the room and things are different from my expectation, do I sit and observe and what's the saying? When in Rome, do what the Romans do. Do I do that? Or do I try to force my will and my expectations to manifest in that classroom, even though that may not be what that space or those individuals need? I was thinking about when you said create the pipeline to theater process.
Yeah.
The
school to theater pipeline.
And for me, it's theater, but at least with a lot of the students, it's not just theater, it's the things that theater provide, right? It's the safety, it's the support, it's the community, it's the soft skills that theater, because a lot of my students, they don't necessarily want to be actors, they just like being around us, right?
Yeah.
Because we know we can talk, they can talk about their feelings with us without somebody being like, man, you a wuss, or you a this, you know what I mean? They can just open up, so it's theater, but it's something else, like school, pipeline to community, pipeline to
Imagination.
growth and development. Yes.
Imagination.
All of that.
One of the things that, and I'll come to you, Brian, one of the things that came up, two things actually. One, Kurt would always say, Kurt has a saying, that's the juvenile justice system, baby. And my first time in the juvenile justice system last fall, the first time you said it, I was like, okay, great, download it, set, because every single time there is something. And if you are someone that is very easily put off by things being different or things not going, it can be very jarring. And it's folks that are like, all right, well, here we are, but that's also like such a very specific artist skill. Of being willing to go with the flow.
That's right, yeah. Well, and because
Personality.
you were saying,
Personhood.
you were saying about, coming in with these expectations of what you were going to do, not only is that potentially triggering and traumatizing, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yes.
It's not going to work that way.
Yeah.
So you are going to continually be frustrated. So as an artist, do you want to do exciting work with these communities? Well, then you have to learn how to do that work.
Yes.
I've because I've been doing this a long time, I've worked with, I recruit brilliant teachers who have a passion for teaching and think they might like working in corrections, juvenile corrections. They don't last. And so in unpacking that, I coined my mantra is that if you will not allow your heart to be broken every day, you cannot do this work. So it's a choice. I make it a choice, not a condemn, not judgment, not condemnation, not I'm better than you. You're not, It is. If you will not allow your heart to be broken every day, you can't do this work. and there's, right? So brilliant teachers wash out. They wash out. But I'm still looking for brilliant teachers. I'm looking for people that have a really passion for it, and then bringing them in and exposing them to. Is this something like both Jen and Kevin were pretty new, right? Oz, old dog like me, been doing this a long time, right? Knew him in his work long before I hired him. But with Jen and Kevin, you don't know, right? And then you watch them find themselves, you watch them discover, and you watch the lightning bolts that are going on, the epiphanies that are happening, and I always, obviously I'm Caucasian, old, and cisgender, so, I don't need other Caucasian, old cisgender in the room, right? So Jen, LGBTQ female, and Oz, a black man, but with albinism, right? That's really unique, and he does such a beautiful job of talking about albinism right from the very beginning. It's like steps right up and says, and then does this beautiful exercise with him, and where some of the boys might be going, what's up with that? Then they see his heart, and immediately, yeah, it's no, and Kev, raised in South Africa.
What's that?
Yeah. And so an immigrant, and all of that's, and newly discovering this, getting a passion for it. And three unique teaching artists, totally different stories, but all the same heart. That's what we bring in, always the same heart.
Someone once told me, just to piggyback off that, it's in addition to if your heart can't be broken every day, you can't do this work. But I remember one of my mentors told me, she said, producing a play or a song is a byproduct of what we do. We're actually in the business of problem solving.
Yes.
If you are not willing to problem solve every moment that you are here, you will not make it in this company.
Brian, you had a question or comment?
Just a little bit of what I heard was like connectivity. So like typically when you encounter somebody in the correctional center,
A little louder, please.
if you encounter somebody in the correctional center, whether it's which is a marginalized neighborhood, if they have a nickname, they've been acting since they got their nickname. Like if Little Joe, if David all of a sudden start calling himself Little Joe, then ask him, when did you become Little Joe? Why are you Little Joe? And what's the difference between David and Little Joe? So that's a connector.
Yeah.
And like regardless of race, sex, whatever, it's three conditions in human nature that everybody have. They all want to be respected, appreciated, and loved.
Yeah.
So if you go into it with that in your mindset, then it's easy to connect because you can understand where they don't feel respected, appreciated, or loved. And through theater, you can give them a semblance of what that feels like.
Yeah. I have this saying. Some you might have heard this before, but like in theater, we get the opportunity to rehearse life and to practice life without penalties in ways that we don't get to in our day-to-day lives. And for me, like that is the opportunity that we have as theater artists in giving the gift to theater, not just of theater, of arts to others that may not have access to it. It gives them that perspective. Like it gives them that opportunity to be able to practice, to be able to rehearse, to be able to try things in a place where they won't feel threatened, and be able to take the confidence they gain from that into the world, into their lives, into places that can and are threatening to them. Are there any final thoughts or sharings from the audience or you, please? And we have two more, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up for the next.
Just briefly,
Yeah.
I love the explanation of school, traditional school as traumatizing in itself.
Yeah.
And I think that you stated that so very clearly. And providing experiences that are not traumatizing. that allow for questioning and for looking at the world in a different way is enough. Doing productions, yeah, you may get there, you may not. I mean, 18 years as a teaching artist in public schools, and doing productions was how we started. Then I've mentioned this to other people. Then we went to videos, we went to graphic storybooks, photo, dream autobiography, whatever would allow that kind of expression. And the very last thing I want to comment on is you talked about the necessity for constant problem solving. One of the things that we offer is problem creation. We go into schools, we ask questions.
Yeah.
We say, this is not the only way to do that. You
Yeah.
can look at this. You can look at your playground activities and look at colonialism and go, hey, you know, there's similar things there. And I think part of the reason we're solving problems all the time is because the hierarchical system that we're challenging is so fucked up in the first place. But in addition, I think the artist's very need to imagine and question is a problem for the system. And so we create the problems we're required to solve. That's not a negative, that's a positive.
I would say the thing to go along with that too, and I think you commented on it in your work, is another mentor told me, like, when you go into these spaces, because you are asking them to operate in a way that they don't normally operate or don't want to operate, or they can't see the vision that you see. So two things that you made me think the mentor told me. My faith going into whatever space I go into has to be greater than everybody else in there. I have to be able to see where I'm going and where I want to go, and I have to have faith that I'm going to get there. I have faith that I'm going to, through problem solving, find a way to bring together some type of coalition to help me get there. And part of bringing that coalition together is finding champions within the space. I think everybody said it. Somebody in the jail or at the school feels the way that we feel. And as well, I think you said, like, you had COs that you know advocated for you with the Department of Corrections at the times that you weren't there. And I know when we went, when I worked with story catchers and we went into the Cook County Juvenile Detention Centers, we always tried to identify who are our champions. Who are the people that are going to be in the rooms that we can't get in, that are going to be sharing our values and advocating for those.
And take care of those champions.
Yes.
We have one last comment and then we'll be done.
Last quick comment and a quick plug, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
But it's a plug about something we're all trying to do anyway. Okay. What really resonated with me was what was said about the connection between trauma and racism. Okay. And so there's a really, really big practitioner of trauma out there that we all know about. It's operating every day, holidays and weekends too. And its mission statement is founded in racism. And that practitioner is Amazon. The company, Amazon, practices trauma every single day and disproportionately affecting people of color and immigrants. And it's as far, you know, it's on a global scale. I work there so that I know. I wrote a novel about it. I wrote a screenplay about it. It's called The Smiling Box Monster. And a couple scenes from the screenplay are going to be staged at Annoyance Theater this summer.
Nice.
That's my plug.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you all so much for your time. We'll take a short 5-minute break. Everyone run to the restroom, and then we'll jump into the next workshop. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you to our panelists. One more round of applause.